Welcome to an emergency episode of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast from Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and it is 107.5, a half episode titled An Emotional Farewell, as we bid farewell to the great Neale Daniher, who the news broke of his passing yesterday as we were recording. There is also other breaking news as of this morning, as we're recording this, of Brad Scott being sacked from Essendon as senior coach. We will cover all of that as well in this mini episode. But without further ado, how are you doing this morning, Mr. Sarek?
Not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, as I said, sort of just taking on all the news that's going in. Obviously, I haven't actually done too much since yesterday. But yeah, as I said, it'll be good to do a proper little bit for Neale Daniher, and then there's a bit to dissect with the Brad Scott situation.
Yeah, that's right. There's suddenly a lot of information out there that we have to kind of cover and grasp all of this. One of them will obviously be a very detailed farewell of Neil's legacy, not just on field as a player, off field as a coach, as well as his rise in growing the Fight MND campaign and pretty much the entirety of the 12 years that that it became such a big thing for football. With obviously Big Freeze 12 coming up in just a couple of weeks, and then obviously what what Essendon sacking Brad Scott means. One, not just for the players for the rest of the season, with Dean Solomon stepping up as interim coach, but what it means, post 2026. So there's certainly a lot to cover.
Hmm. Right, shall we get started with obviously the big and saddest one is
Yes.
the passing of Neale Daniher, beloved player for Essendon, a beloved coach for Melbourne, and obviously a big campaigner and obviously victim, unfortunately, of MND.
Sorry, you caught me in the middle of having a drink. I wasn't expecting you to stop there.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. All right. So obviously, he was born in the 15th of February, 1961. Part of the big Essendon family. I just got rid of the family notes, but it's obviously Terry. Uh, yeah, Terry Danaher, triple premiership player. He's the oldest brother. Then you obviously had Neil with all his. I'm going to talk about it. Anthony played for Sydney and Essendon, and the youngest, Chris Danaher, who played for Essendon. So obviously, a big part of Essendon's history. It's going to be a very sad day for the club.
Yes.
But to my surprise, I didn't really know too much about his playing career. He's only an 82 game player. Um, Still kicked 32 goals in his time. I think he also played a tiny bit in the ruck occasionally. So obviously he was part of a pretty decent Essendon team. I don't think they would have won a premiership in that time, 79 to 90. Um, that's still pretty solid throughout. Um, Obviously, he then went on to coach the Melbourne Demons not too long after his playing career, starting in 1998, taking them to the grand final, falling short against his former club in Essendon in the 2000 Premiership until he got I think he got the sack, or he may have moved on in 2007 before I think Dean Bailey took charge.
I believe so.
I think that was around that era.
I think that's correct.
Yeah. But honestly, he was a very decent coach. Obviously, well beloved by his players. He was known as a very much a players' coach, and pretty solid record. 102 wins, one draw, 108 losses, and yeah, obviously from 211 games. The only two bad seasons were really 2003, 2007. Had a bit of a dip in 1996 before obviously going to that grand final. But overall, as I said, I just remember him as one of the more charismatic and likable coaches. You know, And to be honest, in terms of the decade, probably their best coach that would be for a while. And, as I said, depending on how you rate Goodwin, I mean, obviously the premiership makes up for a lot. But I think for most people, I think Danaher would probably be a bit more in people's hearts from just a personal standpoint.
Yeah, no, he's I was too young to very much obviously see some of his coaching career, but from the history of his time in more senior positions within the AFL, he was managing West Coast when West Coast had started to come through into the AFL system in the 90s. Um, and, he very much had a very notable impact across the entire football world. Very much had even though it was as much of a smaller hand, he did have a hand in helping cultivate a lot of the growth in New South Wales and Queensland, as well as some of the bigger names like Kevin Sheedy and all of that as well. It was all very important to pretty much the entirety of the AFL system, that those areas worked. Because being NRL states, but his work off field after his MND diagnosis is what he's most known for, and is what his most profound piece of work has been, is taking this fight the entire way through. Because when you get an MND diagnosis, you're given maybe 2 years at most. It's a very, very um, like dangerous disease, and it is
Yeah.
very quick acting, and you
And
don't get very much
it's
time with
just so
it.
tough. Yeah, because it just takes away autonomy, which is one of the hardest things to deal with when you're talking about a disease of that nature. Because while you do obviously want to fight as long as you can, and there's a lot of brave people doing that, it obviously takes a toll on not just you, but your friends and family around you. And some people do worry about. Uh, how they'll be remembered afterwards. So I think it's very important for Neale Daniher, or sorry, important for the people battling, to have someone like Neale Daniher to be like, if you just if you're a great person, yeah, there's going to be things that are going to be very hard to deal with. But, you can always be better. You can always rise above the disease. And it's not always about getting a cure. Obviously, unfortunately, it's what took his life. But, he's going to be far more remembered for his words and action, both post and during his diagnosis.
Yeah, it's his impact in developing the Fight MND campaign. Obviously, helping big hand in creating the Big Freeze event itself that happens between Melbourne and Collingwood every year on the King's birthday weekend, and the fact that it's become he's become so synonymous as the face of being the fight against this disease, and now that he's left his mark, the fight can continue on without him, knowing that in the future they will find a cure, and be able to hopefully shut down this disease from taking the lives of so many other people purely from the work that he began.
Yeah, exactly. And just talking about the Big Freeze, I've got their website on here. I think it might be a good time to reflect, just on the first one, as I said, because it really started out, with, I mean, obviously still very important and all that, but it was really the closer football community that was involved in the first one. I mean, look, you look at the names, Tim Watson, Sam Lane, Ross Stevenson, Dermot Brereton, Luke Darcy, Sam Newman, Brian Taylor, Mark Robinson, Gary Lyon, Peter Helly, and Mick Malloy. Obviously, as good as it was, is starting very much within the AFL community, but it sort of, has grown into this national event where, even people who don't particularly follow football have, obviously followed into it. And you look at the people that got, who slid in the last one, Oh, sorry, this is a bit old actually. This article was from 2022. But yeah, it's gone a lot bigger. I haven't actually remembered who slid last year. I'll quickly get that up. You got players like Alyssa Healy, Cadell Evans, stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
it's really
yeah,
transcended the football world into Australian personalities and just people across the nation in all sorts of sports, or even people out of sports, people who
mm,
don't really have a touch of sport, or have it at very minimal to zero influence in sort of sport in general. It's just all become about raising that
yeah,
money and doing something special for the cause, and um, and yeah, and just hoping that every year, as the donations come through, they'll continue to fund their research into finding that right answer in due time.
yeah, exactly. And as I said, it's also the money doesn't. I mean, obviously, there's a big one to research, but as I said, even just the holistic side of it, being raising awareness to families, not fighting alone, and obviously the charities outside of that, obviously a lot of their um funds have gone direct to the research, but I'm sure there's a lot of other um offshoot charities that maybe deal with helping families and all that, deal with it, that have oh, sorry,
Bless
very
you.
much benefited. Thank you. From all this attention going towards motor neuron disease.
Yeah, that's right. And hopefully, even if they do start to find a cure and find avenues to properly fight this disease, they will continue to do events like the Big Freeze and continue to raise money, and just don't feel like that just because there is an answer there doesn't mean they have to stop, because this is something that has become synonymous with the King's birthday weekend at this point,
Mm,
and it's always just become a very important part of the AFL calendar in this day and age. And I hope that the AFL actually does do a lot more charity events during
mm,
big marquee games, because I think it is really special that the clubs and the company itself of the AFL has this sort of, I guess, power to and responsibility in a way to be able to stand up and support you know support causes that could really
mm.
use that extra assistance. And I still think the MND campaign is still one of the biggest that needs so many more eyes on it, because I don't know what kind of research and stuff happens and like charity stuff happens overseas. But knowing that we are, as Australians, the forefront of finding a cure for this is probably one of the most important things that we've done in our modern era.
Yeah. And obviously, as I said, it's big Australian impact. I mean, obviously, Neale Daniher winning Australian of the Year last year. Obviously, he wasn't particularly looking for it, but it was great to be acknowledged for it. And obviously, even just passing on the legacy to his daughter to be able to continue. Obviously, I think that was about 2, 3 years ago. To make sure that the legacy lives on, and it's more than just his life, even though his life will forever be synonymous for the work that he did.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, his work on field as a player, even if it was a small amount, his work as a coach at Melbourne, and then his work off field with the MND movement is extremely
Yeah.
profound, and he will always be remembered as such a lovable face in Australian media, a character that everyone would love, as both as
Yeah.
players, coaches, staff, media
Yeah.
personalities, and the
I mean,
like.
in the 2021 grand final, or 20? I can't
21.
remember. The one that Melbourne won.
21.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the two people, like Neale Daniher and Ron Barassi, that you're like, I'm really glad that Melbourne won that premiership just so they could get to celebrate, one more time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, so absolutely. Um, yeah, it's not much more I particularly have to say
No, I don't
about
have
it.
too much more on that either. It's
Yeah,
just
and just yeah,
we it
I
is
just referring what we said last time. If you are able to give, and that is important because as much as um, it's a very important issue. We as people can only give what we have,
yes.
and there's more than just money in terms of how you can help a cause. But if you are able to, make sure you get around this big freeze campaign in a couple of weeks because, as I said, it will be touching. It will be larger than AFL, but also it will be a great way to celebrate a great man.
Yeah, absolutely. Go buy your physical beanies. Buy a digital beanie if you can't buy a physical beanie,
Mm.
whether it's because you're overseas or the like. Um, or just make a donation, just in general. Like this campaign is so important, and um, yeah, it's one of the few campaigns in Australia that could really still use so much funding and so much work put into it. Um, that does sadly mean we have to bid farewell. We do hope that he is now resting peacefully, knowing that he's done all that he could to start this campaign and fight for the campaign, and hopefully his daughter and his family and all of the people working with the Fight MND movement will be able to find a cure in due time. So, unfortunately, we do have to go from one bit of sad news to not as sad, but maybe a little bit more predictive. Is the sacking of Brad Scott from Bombers as senior coach?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of do a tonal switch after that because, as I said, it is a very interesting decision, and obviously, it's still just football. But it is a very surprising move. Essendon, after the first 11 games, only managed one win. Obviously, struggled at Dreamtime at the G, basically due to injury, but obviously, with a few other struggles that we'll talk about. He is now sacked. Unlike Carlton, Voss, Voss, he didn't walk away. He was just straight up next.
Yep.
Uh, and interim coach will be Dean Solomon for the remainder of the season. Obviously, they haven't made any comment on whether they plan to keep Solomon afterwards, whether they're really testing him out with this period. But what will be will be. And yeah, they're pretty much paying out his contract until 2017. There's apparently $1 million left in his contract, so they're still paying him out. And it is just another in the string of coaches, pretty much since Matthew Knight's. Well, technically post Kevin
I
Sheedy,
don't
I should.
I don't understand. I was kind of talking about this the other day with Carlton. It's like the Bombers are kind of in the exact same sort of position where they just kind of let the higher art management do whatever they want and just don't give the coach time to actually mold this team into
Yeah.
what he wants because of the fact like it's 3 years. All he had was
Mm,
3 years, and in 2 of those years they were injured to all hell. He has not been able to really sit down and actually develop the kind of team that he wanted to build. Part of that was also
yeah.
due to the fact that they didn't really have a dedicated ruckman. They had they had they have Cox, not Cox, sorry,
Brian.
Brian, thank you, who was injured for like half of that time. So they had to use obviously the great Todd
Michelson
Goldstein
and
and
Peter Wright.
Peter Wright
Oh,
as well. You know, players who aren't necessarily one who was actually a dedicated ruckman but is just way too old for the game, and the other who isn't a dedicated
mm,
ruckman is more of a forward. Like he was Scott was just doing a juggling act pretty much the entire time, and it just this feels really unfair that he doesn't exactly get
yeah.
like his full 4 years to try and give the Bombers some sort of hope.
Yeah, I think it's just weird because, like, obviously, I mean, coaching's like that. You never quite. There's not too many fair sackings in coaching. I think there's a few coaches that have just gone, yeah, no, that's very understandable. They were just purely crap. There's always going to be a lot of situation, and when you step back, I think the biggest problem for Brad Scott's era was just the list building in the late Dodoro era, where they just refused to acknowledge internal issues. They were very much band-aid solutions. We're talking about, their midfield, people they've brought in, a lot of their older recruits. They were just keeping on going without really fleshing out some of the structural issues that really prevented them from ever reaching a peak, which was obviously before Brad Scott's time. And yeah, as I said, they just never really quite had it. Obviously, for a lot of this tenure, the defense has been absolutely rubbish, which is very interesting because although Solomon was only really put in that position earlier this year, he was the head of Essendon's defense, which is, interesting.
Here nor there,
Um,
kind of.
well, it's neither here nor there, but there's been a lot of interesting things said about Solomon. There's been some indications that he might have been wanting the push. Apparently, they didn't really get along well, Scott and Solomon. So, while it's not ideal, at least at the very basics of it, he might at least clear the air. But, as I said, it's just, and it's what we're sort of talking about. It's like, what do you want a coach to do? And, and you compare this to Carlton, where at least with Carlton, Voss was given a chance to walk away. At least with Carlton, I still believe that they would have stick with Voss until the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree.
And with
I don't think
Carlton,
Voss would have been sacked. I think purely for the fact that Carlton had too
no,
many eyes on them, and the fact that
yeah,
it would be going off of too much of previous history to just sack a coach
yeah,
mid-season. I feel like
like at least there was a boiling pot with Carlton. Whereas like this, I think even the media sort of understood where Essendon was.
yeah, everyone
Like
knew that Essendon is a young rebuilding team. Injured pretty much to all hell, especially now after
mm,
Dreamtime, where they suffered pretty much five injuries off the bat. Like
mm,
they're in a position where they just have to take each week as it comes and just hope they can get through somewhat unscathed. Like it's no different to what
mm,
Richmond currently is in, or what West Coast has been in the past. It's just about
yeah,
but they're a young team. You have to give them time, and that means you have to give the coach time to mold these players, to develop these players. If you're just gonna sack a coach in the middle of a season after only having him for 3 years, that's not enough time to do anything.
yeah. And it's so hard because as I said, clearly you can't help to think that part of it is also just because of Carlton's 2-game win streak, which again, one of them was against a very injured Bulldogs, and the other one was against Port Adelaide, which were, or Asiata Porti, who were pretty much abysmal.
Yeah, so again, it's
Let's face
basically
it.
two here nor there wins, really.
Yeah, I mean they've improved, and it was good to see them get the win. They showed a bit of resistance, and but it's not that far off how they were actually playing. Like Carlton's biggest problem was they just randomly bottled it in, and like there's not that many Essendon games where they've been particularly in it. As I said, that's very much reflected in the one win, but at the same time, it's like, oh, what you're gonna sack the coach to get a win against West Coast, maybe? And they're like, if that doesn't happen, it's like, well, what was this all for? As I said, they've got West Coast, they've got Carlton, and they've got Melbourne. So there are like a few avenues, but it's like, oh, they get like a 3-win streak, maybe go back to normal, and just like what they get second last instead of last. This is like big whoop, you know. If you're gonna make changes, and like this is what needs to happen at Essendon, like they're very much primed for post-season changes because they've got some players that they just need to delist.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
I'm not going to be like too harsh at this point, but like there's got a fair few older players that just aren't contributing at the moment. I guess I will. Like you got Langford, who's pretty much playing like it's his last season. You got Setterfield, who just can't get his body right and can't get the impact
Yep.
when he's on the park. You've got Ben Mackay, obviously in very fluctuating form. and none of them have been dropped.
Um,
Guelphy as well. Obviously, he's more injury prone. Um, as I said, none of them have really been dropped. Obviously, you have Ben Mackay and Archie Perkins, but they're really the only two during the year.
mm,
But it's also like, well, who are you going to bring in? Because as we said, they've got such an English injured list. So, it's like, yeah, they're playing underperforming veterans, but like, who else are they going to play? Like, they're just going to play some kids, so and have absolutely no support for the young talent they're trying to foster. So it's like, like Brad Scott with the option of making no moves has gotten fired for not making enough moves. It's
his
just
his hands were
bizarre.
basically tied, and like upper management clearly gave him no options and no room to work with, and it's just so unfair. Because like I know,
Yeah,
obviously, like part of the AFL world has a bit of a grudge on him because of what happened at North. Again, the kind
yeah,
of the
yeah.
big one, and we talked about this last week and the week before, is with Boomer and him kind of
Mm.
being forced to retire too early. Him, Andrew Petrie. Um, but it's this was too early. He deserved at least to maybe not. He deserved to want to at least play out this season.
Yeah.
And then see what
Well, at least
happens.
like if it was the end of next season or the end of this season, at least it would be like a minor transition.
Yeah,
Like you got a coach, new off season. You've obviously made some list cuts. You might make a few trades. Stephen King obviously with what he did. It's like, oh, you'd trade your three players, but he had an off season to develop a midfield core. But like, well, if you want to make a statement, like who are you bringing up? Like, Essendon's midfield, probably where they have the most experience, where you could make a few changes.
and
Like, what are you gonna do?
and you look
Like,
at
oh, you bring in Sardis, like that's one player, you know?
and now that you've gotten rid of your head coach in the middle of a season, after a debacle of an off season in regards to merit, what is it
Yeah.
like that? And I mentioned this in a lot in our last episode as well. It's like that kind of whole thing now semi blows up in your face because he probably stayed because he had that kind of belief in Scott that there was gonna be some sort of solid development process with him and these players. Like, but now
Wow.
you don't know what
Hey,
this what.
I think he just
I mean,
stayed because I didn't get it. You
maybe,
know what I
but
mean,
like,
though.
but now
I think
there's no
like,
direction for this club anymore.
yeah.
So what
I think with
is
Merritt, like you could tell he had some sort of investment, like right now. Like he's still playing alright. And I think he's professional enough to still continue.
oh yeah,
But it does
absolutely.
raise a point. It's like when do players just stop believing? Because as I said, I don't even think that Essendon I, I think it's a partial issue. Like I think like a lot of the players not trying are their veterans. And when I say trying, I mean in like an AFL standpoint.
Yeah, yeah.
Like players are always trying, but like there's players that have just grown up in a system that's been too, sporadic. Never really felt the flow of good coaching and all that sort of thing. Because a lot of players, like if you're a lifetime player for Essendon right now, you haven't really had stable coaching. You know, like when you have coaching changes like you have, it means that there's a lot of staff changing. So it's not just your head coach, it's line coaches, all that sort of stuff while they, try and figure it out. So, as I said, there's not really much advantage for having stayed at Essendon. At least the young people who are trying and all that, have been, you know, uh, I guess, able to just simply play what's in front of him. Um,
Yeah, it's like
whereas,
their
yeah,
options. Obviously, they're all within contract, so they don't have too many options in terms of actually looking elsewhere right now. Especially because they're
oh
young
yeah,
players with not that much experience. You never know what's kind of on
mm,
hands. But in terms of just like the where did the players go in terms of like a direction for this club? Like all they can really do now is just kind of play for themselves, not necessarily like in an
mm,
individualistic sort of manner, but like playing for their spots in the team. Showing
yeah,
that they have some worth and aren't going to get culled by a brand new coach coming in. Like it's it's never good. in a lot of
No.
cases, and especially if you're a club like this that isn't in a good position both on field and off field. Um, and you expect big swings to come through towards the end of the season and big changes. You just These young players don't deserve that. Like they haven't been given anywhere near enough time to prove themselves.
No, exactly. And as I said, it's pretty baffling for the both of us. But I think that it should be worth noting that we've obviously Scott going away, the caretaker. If they do go for a different route and just don't go with the interim, it'll be 3 clubs currently looking for a coach in 2027.
Correct.
Carlton obviously not committing either way. Josh Fraser doesn't seem likely, from what is said, to put his hand up, but you never know. And then obviously you've got Tasmania, obviously
Well,
trying to figure out.
well, I think we all know I think the Tasmania one is already basically a done deal. It's just not officially a done deal, and that'll be Nathan Buckley's job. And it's the whole reason why he got back into coaching, and is currently an assistant coach at Geelong. So there's a fair chance that the Tasmania one's kind of already sorted. But it's these two. It's Essendon and Carlton that are the 2 big ones. I don't know how many assistant coaches are currently interested in a head coach position, especially for these 2 clubs. That's a lot of monkeys on backs that they're gonna have to try and get rid of going into clubs like these.
Yeah, and if you compare Essendon and Carlton, Carlton, they've probably got a better list. Let's be honest. They've already started drafting their younger players. You can see where their next crop is coming from. They've still got a few older veterans that are contributing. Still sort of the same problem with Essendon, but a bit more balanced.
Yeah, to Carlton's credit, their list management has been better.
Yeah, Essendon and Carlton both have public pressure, but at least Carlton gave a bit of time. Even Teague and Bolton, they had a fair shake of it. They were pretty mediocre, and they still had their time with the list. As I said, it wasn't like sacking a veteran coach with absolutely nothing to work with. Both of those had chances. Whereas as I said, Essendon, they've just been a dog's breakfast, really, and I can't really see why any coach, unless you were really wanting a chance, would voluntarily. If I was Hinkley or Horse, I just wouldn't bother.
No,
you've already had pressure in your career.
I would very much steer clear of these 2 clubs, absolutely. But yeah, it's just an even bigger of a risk if they do try to go for untested coaches, because then you could just end up in the exact same position, which is.
Well, the thing is, if it was Solomon, they're just going to, as it's been said, another favourite son. You had Matthew Knights, you had Ben Rutten, obviously James Hird. Don't need to talk too much about that.
Yeah.
And, and then you still got Essendon fans that are still, haunted by every time there's a whisper of James Hird coming back, there's Essendon fans are just rocking back and forth and all that sort of thing. It's please, board, don't.
The loud minority that think that's a good idea have no idea what the AFL is about.
Nah, exactly. As I said, Hird, look, as I said, if he may have some ideas and all that to, give to the AFL, but if they're giving him a job that's anything more than a consultant, I don't think you're doing right by the club.
There's a reason he's a media personality and not an assistant coach.
Yeah, and look, as I said, he's paid his dues. I still think, as I said, relatively speaking, punishment was around the crime.
Agreed.
But yeah, it's just, it's not something that you would really want to voluntarily bring into your club. So yeah, as I said, I think that's roughly where it stands. But as I said, the very least, they've got a chance against West Coast. They've got maybe a sigh of relief, but I think even that will be a fairly uphill battle, especially since it is away to, it's going to be funny. Some of the players are probably, starting their, flight plans and all that. Probably not. It's a Sunday game, but, as I said, you're halfway through the week, you're just starting trying to plan on how to beat West Coast, and all of a sudden, you've got a different coach now. So,
yeah. The revolving doors of the AFL world continue to change. But yeah, no, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the Bombers over the weekend and then later on into the season. Not to mention, like, I'm pretty sure they have a pick in the mid-season draft as well, so that's going to be very interesting to
Oh,
see
more
what
than one,
happens
I
with
think.
that.
Um,
Obviously,
yeah,
that
they
is
would have.
tonight as we're recording this. We will talk about it all in next week's episode. Um, but yeah, this has been what a weird, what a weird day of news. Like,
Yeah.
it's a very
Yeah, exactly.
weird
Uh,
amalgamation.
yeah. Just to talk about the mid-season draft, we'll talk about because there's actually a bit of a better list now that actually has the people who have more than one pick.
I guess.
So Port Adelaide have 3 picks, Collingwood have 3 picks, Melbourne have 3 picks, and West Coast have 2 picks. So as I said, and obviously the round order will be in the ladder order. So we will see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
Covering it next week, of course, as well.
Yes, we will cover all of that next week. We'll talk about the players that get picked up, of course, and with the start of the bye rounds, it means we're going to have a little bit more time to talk about stuff like that, because we'll only have 7 games to cover instead of 9. But that does bring us to the end of this emergency episode. Thank you all so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just coming and hanging out with us. It is a bit rough that it was all kind of tragic news. But you know, when it's important to the AFL world, it's important to us, and it only felt right for us to cover it in a separate episode rather than trying to lump it in with everything else. Is there anything else you need to say before I wrap it up?
No. As I said, just yeah. Thanks for watching this little thing, and yeah, business as usual. Next week.
Yep, pretty much. So until then, thank you all so much. We love you all, and we'll see you all next week. Take care.